Reading this book by Mr. Re-Dollarisation, so that's the principles of dealing with the changing world order, whereby the nations succeed and fail. So again, this book is a hefty book, right? Again, the online version of this book is also available. If you go to YouTube, you have a summary also, an audio summary is there by Re-Dollarisation, by Sir Re-Dollarisation. And I purchased this book and I just completed this book today. So, Abhi, the thing was, it has talked about how the nations basically rise and fail. And the same has happened with all the nations in the past, right? A few of the good pointers I just came about while reading this book is, and happy to discuss with my audience. But the thing is, we have been talking about the rise and fall of USA, at the current big economic power, the world supreme power, having the world reserve currency being the USD. And we have we are seeing that trade of the debasement rate, right? That is, the people are shifting from the reserve currency of the world or the paper currency of the world or the fiat currency of the world to commodities, especially gold and silver. So gold being the first commodity because gold is not abundant, it is scarce, the precious commodity in the world, and then silver maybe per se, but majorly gold. Now the scenario is, if we talk about this trade of the debasement trade or the de-dollarization trade, that is moving away from the dollar, because there are some issues going upon right in the US economy. And the issues have not cleared up or figured up after the Trump's administration. So the issues have been aggravated much more after like he came to power and he has been just trying to chicken out every time. But the issue has been there before his election as well, right? The thing we have been seeing is the rise of the US debt. The US debt is as high as $40 trillion now. It's servicing more than $1 trillion just in the interest commitment. Every year, US is paying $1 trillion just in the interest commitment to pay that principal amount of $40 trillion. Now, this book of the principle of the dealing with the changing world order by Sir Re-Dollarisation, it basically talks about the rising trajectory, the reaching the top, and the downward fall of the rising supreme power. And the same has happened with majorly all the powers in the past. So US is not the first supreme power. Prior to US, we had the Britain, the Great Britain. Prior to Britain, we had the Dutch. Prior to them, we had the Portuguese. Prior to them, we had some other kind of small groups or tribals or dynasties as well. Every group of people, every dynasty, every group or every country has come up. They've risen in power. They became at the top. They came at the top. They became the supreme power. They trade in their own reserve currency or commodities per se, like prior to the Britain, and then they fall. And the cycle has repeated every time. Every single time, the cycle has repeated. As someone has said, that history doesn't tend to repeat, it tends to rhyme, right? In the same way, all the countries have risen to the top and then failed. And the new supreme power, which has challenged, or the emerging supreme power, which has challenged the current supreme power, has lost the throne. And the new emerging power has become the new supreme power, the new king of the global economy. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the Great Britain, the US, and after that, no one knows. Of course, not China per se. I'll come to that. Now, how the whole story has come into place, I won't go into like deep dives or the mechanics of the stuff. Just like telling you in general as a broader overview. You guys can buy this book. Like, there's no recommendation. The thing is, every country, when it comes to power, the existing power has been challenged by the new emerging power. It's a cycle of three things always. All the rise and fall has been a part of three basic things. One is the current equity and debt cycle, or the capital market cycle, which might not be so prevalent like prior to Britain or like Dutch per se, because Dutch, like, they came up with this concept of equities and stock market in the early 1600s. But maybe like prior to Dutch or somewhat like prior to the Great Britain also, because the stock market is like it took time for them to flourish and to get things automated per se. Uh, the thing is that it's being followed by three most important cycles. One is the capital market cycle. The second is the internal orders and disorders. And the third one is the external orders and disorders. So all three things, they tend to pave towards the rise and decline of the current supreme power, the current supreme global power per se. The new power comes into place, right? So as the new power comes into place, there is all flourishment in the economy, the period of boom, economic expansion. People are doing new businesses, rise of innovation, rise of income and distribution of incomes and gains among people. There's always an equation towards such thing, the rise of innovation, followed by the commercial spirit, followed by striving, thriving capital markets, which leads to the rise in the productivity, which ultimately leads to the income distribution or the income and the wealth distribution among people. This is the cycle. The new people have come up into the environment, the new country or the new tribal group or the new dynasty is running the particular global economy per se, capture the other, I would say, the other kind of territories per se. They have a control over the global commodity cycle, or they're holding something which is very precious, which only that country has, or a couple of other countries has, which are the close allies or friends of that country. The country is rising, economic boom expansion, interest rates are extremely low, and due to that, the people are investing into the stock markets, thriving capital markets, like more innovation, like more productivity, public capex, private capex. Like again, we can talk about the populism or communism or capitalism or socialism per se. Again, these are like out of scope of this discussion. The market tends to rise due to the lower interest rate environment. Huge amount of liquidity is there in the environment in that particular country or domain, and the market becomes a bubble. At that particular point of time, the market becomes a bubble. It starts to correct, it starts to crash. And the people's wealth starts to get eroded off. The people come on the streets, they have to sell off their homes, their personal assets just to survive. Now, again, every crash doesn't always mean the country will lose the reserve currency. Because the same happened with the US in 1929, the Great Depression, and 1971 Nixon shock. But the gold was abundant because the amount of currency that Nixon was printing or the Federal Bank at that time was printing, it didn't have enough gold to back that money. And as a result, right, that standard was abundant. We had the Vietnam War, we had some oil shock at that point of time, and the gold was not enough to back the physical currency or the paper notes per se. But the US did not collapse. Still, US has emerged out still as the reserve currency of the world or the global supreme power. But the same cycle has followed in the prior to like US as well, the Great Britain or the Dutch or the Portuguese. The market collapses. There is always some internal order and disorder as well. That is the leftist and the rightist. The people who have a lesser income, the lower middle class or the middle class per se, they tend to fight a war, or they tend to rebel against the people who have the wealth. There's always an income distribution between the people who have and who have nots. The money tends to flow, or the wealth tends to flow from those people who are having that wealth to those people who do not have that wealth. It again increases that civil internal order and disorder. The people start to fight civil wars, the political wars, the stock market is rising, right? The bubble is at the peak, the market crashes, like people are fighting. And then comes the external order and disorder. But the external parties, that is the next rising supreme power, tends to take advantage of these conflicts. They tend to take the advantage and they tend to become the major supreme power via different modes. It can be a trade war, it can be a technological war, it can be a capital war, it can be a geological war, or it can be a military war. And that is something which I've told you in order. Starting with the trade war. The trade war is something as a tariff. Like US had been imposing tariffs on like multiple countries, so that's a trade war. Then you had a technological war. That's very crucial as of this particular point of time. Because many wars nowadays are not fought with guns or bombs. They're fought with tech. Like China, like US has the tech, but Taiwan has the chips. Taiwan has the technology to make that chips which go into the US AI, the data centers. If China occupies Taiwan, it can control that chips and hamper the US economy, right? That's the tech war. A particular country or a group of countries or certain countries or specific countries having different types of technologies with them, which the other countries do not have. Third one is the geological war, trying to capture territories directly or indirectly. US trying to capture Venezuela, war with Iraq, right? The US trying to capture the Greenland. China wants to capture Taiwan with no other kind of disruption in terms of like military or war in the other countries. Economic and supply chain constraints like will be there and definitely will be there. And that we are seeing currently in the US Iran war as well. US Israel versus Iran war. Then you have the capital wars, trying to restrain the countries using the country's financial system. For example, Russia was banned using the SWIFT system. Then if all these things doesn't come into place, then you have the military war, the World War I and the World War II. So we have faced everything we are facing in a way, like, right, every stage of these wars we have seen with, right, like US in a kind of a tech war or a tech war or a trade war, right, with all the countries in the world, especially with China, having a capital war with Russia, a geological war with the Venezuela or Israel or Iran, sorry, or Greenland, right, a military war, right, with Iran, of course. So all these kinds of things are present in the market. So different types of wars. So all these wars are being imposed by this emerging country who wants to become the next supreme power and the current supreme power. The current supreme power gets dethroned because of this capital market cycle, the internal disorder, because these people also want the new country to come up, right? And the external orders and disorder, that is the other country, has taken the advantage of this disorder and become the next supreme power. And that is something which leads to the rise of the next supreme power, and the same cycle continues, starting with Portuguese, the Dutch, the Great Britain, and the US. And one more thing which I have found it common in this particular book was the current power always takes a lot of debt or loan from the new emerging power. The Dutch, right? The Portuguese, like for example, if you say, or the Dutch was a new emerging power. So the Portuguese took a lot of loan from Dutch. Dutch took a lot of loan from the Great Britain. Britain took a lot of loan or a debt from US at the time of World War II. And all these situations to fight the war, to sustain the country, to help the people living in the country in the form of subsidies, or for economic expansion, these countries become indebted. And at a point of time, they're unable to pay off. And the country which has given the loan or the debt, which is the rising supreme power, it tends to sell off the debt of that country. और जब आप उस कंट्री के डेट को बेच देते हो, the value of that particular currency, who is the current supreme power, tends to come down. And the same is happening with US. Much of the US debt has been sold off at the Chinese markets. Japan holds the highest quantity or the quantum of the volume of the US debt, but China has sold off a significant quantity of the US debt. When you are selling off the US bonds, the value of the USD currency is also coming down. Because when you are purchasing the US denominated bonds, so you are purchasing them in USD, and hence the value of the USD tends to rise. But when you are selling them, there is a supply of USD in the market, and the value of the currency tends to come down. But again, USD has still not lost the reserve currency status or the supreme power status. One more reason for that is, if specifically we see 70% or more than 65% of the global trade is being done in USD. USD में ही आपको खरीदना है और बेचना है, और आप कुछ नहीं कर सकते. You have no other option. The other countries started to agree to purchase oil or the sources of energy or the other major commodities in their own home currency, especially China, because China agreed to purchase oil from Venezuela, also agreed to purchase oil from Iran, the Chinese yuan. The war started to take place because US doesn't want the trade in yuan. It doesn't want any kind of global trade to be done in a currency except from USD. It just wants USD. It wants USD to become 100% of the global trade. But that share is going down. That share is like drastically coming down with a slow pace, of course. Again, the problem is who will become the next reserve currency of the world? Can Europe become? Can UK become? Those countries have become very weak. They are the museums of the world. Those countries have a very weak military power as compared to China or USA and even India as well. The financial system is strong, but not so strong as a USA or a China or maybe India to have the reserve currency. To have the reserve currency, you need to have an extremely strong financial system. Extraordinary financial system होना चाहिए, उनके पास नहीं है. Gold, debasement trade is going on. People are shifting to commodities, but we can't shift back to the gold standard. लोगों को आदत होगी है to buy and sell in notes and coins. Coins भी छोड़ो, in notes. Right? In this market, when we are like shifting towards AI, right, and trying to make things like much more simpler, how will we trade in gold? How much grams of gold is worth a packet of rice or like 1 kg of wheat? Right? So like very difficult to have, right? So gold again has a store of value. Keep gold with you for like such kind of contagion events because gold की बहुत value है. INR नहीं हो सकता, अभी नहीं हो सकता obviously because उसका इतना acceptance है नहीं. If we talk about the Chinese yuan, right? So coming like before we come to Chinese yuan, just a point upon USD. When a country is having the reserve currency, or the country becomes a reserve currency, or the currency of that country becomes a reserve currency, it has to run persistent current account deficits. And why the country has to run persistent current account deficits is it has to become a global importer. Because when you import, you're paying in USD. US being a net importer for services and goods. It imports, it pays in USD. The USD tends to circulate everywhere. In turn, that USD or a majority of that USD gets invested into the US bonds. Or that USD is used to purchase some other goods and services in some other countries. Hence, that circulation of USD keeps on. So you need to be a net importer. You can't be a net exporter. So coming back to China, China has every characteristic of becoming a reserve currency in terms of education, in terms of productivity, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of controlling the critical supply chain constituents. China is controlling the energy supplies, the rare earth metals in terms of terbium, in terms of neodymium, the critical minerals, metals in terms of EVs. So majority of, I would say, you say thorium or like uranium, all kinds of precious commodities, I would say, or like critical commodities or rare commodities in terms of energy per se as well. China is having a control over it. In terms of I would say in terms of the global refining capacity also for metals, right? China has the greatest capacity. The day that China occupies Taiwan, it will have the major control over the chips as well. It can stop the US chips. US में AI will crash. Zero हो जाएगा. Nasdaq will become zero. Or the Magnificent 10 will become zero. Right? All these things are into play. The only thing that doesn't allow China to become a reserve currency is its current account surplus. China has been constructed in such a way, or the country has been formulated in such a way, that the country has to run current account surpluses. It can't run current account deficits. Manufacturing as a percentage of the GDP for China is 30% odd. For US, it's like 14-15%, like same with India. China को बनाया ही ऐसे गया है. China cannot run because since the China has a control over the critical supply and it is over capacity or like is trying to control or all these critical inputs, people will have to purchase from China. No other country, at least for the next 100 years, can build up that capacity that it will export something to China. China has built up that capacity and China is doing that as well. China has set targets of, I would say, exorbitant numbers for next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in terms of energy, in terms of minerals, in terms of metals, in terms of minings, in terms of EVs, in terms of energy, in terms of uranium, thorium, rare, everything China is doing. So China has to be a net exporter because China is controlling the supply for the major commodities. उसको supply करना ही पड़ेगा. And that is the only reason that China cannot become a reserve currency. The second reason why China cannot become a reserve currency is after years and years of struggle and pain, China faced the decade of humiliation by Japan and German countries in the early 1800s. Japan, China को भी लोग occupy कर चुके हैं. China has faced humiliation from Japan and Germany, right? They wanted basically silk, porcelain, right, from China, right? But China had nothing to buy from Japan or the Britain. And the things were done, and the trade was being done in silver. And silver was being given to China again and again for trade in the early 1800s I'm talking about. The Britain, they fell short of silver. And then they started to export opium into China. China के लोगों को opium की लत लगवा दी. They became habitual of that opium and they started to purchase that opium. All these things led to that complete collapse of the economy. China is currently following the Marxist system, right, of communism and capitalism. What do I mean by the Marxist system of communism? One state-run party. एक ही पार्टी रहती है and वो सब डिसीजन ले रहे हैं. Like public run companies हैं. Public run companies are extremely solid in China. EV companies, energy companies are majorly government run companies. A public sector companies phenomenally well. They work like private sector companies. Plus an approach of capitalist economy. The private sector companies are given an opportunity to explore, to expand, to grow, increase competition. So China has always been a combination of not just communism, it has been a combination of communism plus capitalism. Communism plus capitalism. Due to all these factors, I believe it's very difficult for China, or almost impossible for China to become the reserve currency. And that is why during all these warlike situations, or when you had that sentiment of the debasement trade that US is going to collapse, money shifted to gold. During war, since we saw the major rally in the gold being done already, so money shifted back to USD. The one reason for that was war. The second reason was also that gold had witnessed a huge rally in the past 1.5 years to 2 years, but the money shifted back to USD in times of war. But money is going back to gold and then coming to USD, then gold and then USD. It's not going into any other currency, not even yuan. Because people tend to realize they just have a debasement trade in terms of gold, or they have to come back to USD. So there might be a scenario in which there is not a debasement trade completely or a de-dollarization trade completely. There is a re-dollarization trade. Instead of de-dollarization, there is re-dollarization. और the current stance remain fixed. गोल्ड में भी पैसा ज्यादा रहेगा, then USD में भी आता रहेगा. The US economy might collapse partially. They might not become the supreme power, like China might become the supreme power, right? I would say, like in terms of military, education, right? It's neck to neck to US in terms of military, education, and some kind of like critical inputs as well. But in terms of the reserve currency, it's again a problem. China will not have a war with US. China will not want US to crack down in terms of like supreme power, because of course if China becomes the supreme power and US is not the supreme power, still the global trade will be done in USD. It might come down, but it's very difficult to shift from a USD like to the other currency because China can't run current account deficits. That's my understanding of this. Happy to know your views. Thank you so much.